Hello, my name is Lewis, and today I'm going to show you how to upgrade the firmware on the Wakespeed WS500 and the AP500 regulators. To do the upgrade, we'll be using the OPE Tether, which has the regulator firmware embedded in it. And so here we go. The very first thing you need to do is you need to take the lid off of the regulator and access the USB port that's on the motherboard of the regulator. You need to connect a USB cable from the USB connector to the USB port on the tether. Once you've connected the cable, power on the tether, and you will notice that the regulator will come on and it'll start flashing an LED, which indicates that it's getting power and is ready for use with the tether. You then need to connect to the tether. To do that, you open your Wi-Fi settings and find the tether Wi-Fi. Here it is right here. Mine is OPE Tether 2890. Yours will be a little different depending on the address that the unit has been assigned. And then you'll come up here and you'll enter 10.10.10.1 in your web browser, which is the IP address of the unit. You should get a login screen. You'll log in as admin. The default password is admin. And that will get you into the tether. The next thing you need to do is go to the app setting app here. Enable configuration mode so that the regulator doesn't go into regulating mode when it's doing this process. You select the regulator, which is going to be right here in the USB, and then you're going to do a save and apply. At this point, the tether should have communication over the USB to the regulator, and you'll know that you have access to the regulator by clicking on, say for example, the AST tab, which will then query the regulator and show some of the values that it has stored or is emanating as part of its status information. Alternately, you can click on the syslog. You can scroll all the way to the bottom, and you'll see messages. You'll see messages that look like this, which are basically the raw output from the regulator coming out of the USB port. And again, that indicates that you are in communication with the unit itself. So now since we've got communications, we're now ready to actually do the firmware update. The firmware update process takes place under the Tools menu. You will scroll down to the bottom of the page and you'll notice an upgrade section here. The first thing we need to do is we need to put the regulator in DFU mode, which is in firmware programming mode. And that's listed down here in the instructions. So to do that, we need to push the reset button for 5 seconds or more. And so the reset button is the thing indicated by the red arrow there. So I'll push the button, hold it down for 5 seconds, and then let go. You will note that all the lights go out on the regulator and they stay off. This usually indicates that you are in DFU programming mode. You can confirm that in one of two ways. If you go ahead and start the upgrade, it'll tell you if you're not in DFU mode up here in the status window. Or alternately, you can do this probe can, which will actually query the USB ports. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom of this log window, you'll notice here are these are the USB devices that are listed for this particular router or for the tether. And you'll notice that we've got one called the STM microelectronics STM device in DFU mode. The DFU mode is a critical thing here. This means that the regulator is in DFU mode, which means that it's in firmware programming mode, which is what we want to do, which is the state that we want the regulator to be in. Okay, so back to the tools page. Scroll down to the bottom. There's a pull down here which allows you to select the version of the firmware. Typically we want the latest version of the firmware, which is the one with the largest number. In this case, it's 2.4.1a. Sometimes we include beta versions. Here we have 2.4.2. Beta versions aren't recommended to be installed unless there's a feature in the beta software that you require, or unless you're a tester and want to test some of the new features that are in the pre-release version of the firmware. But for now, just go ahead and know that you should select the largest number, which is the largest supported tested release. And once selected, you push the upgrade button. That starts the update process. You notice that the page refreshes. And then you need to look here at the status action, status of last action. And here you notice that the router says, the Tether says that it's updating the firmware. So that takes a few minutes. We wait here until that process completes. And if there's any error messages, of course, they'll be listed there as well. So the firmware update has been completed, and now we need to start the regulator. You can do that in a number of different ways. You can unplug the USB and then plug it back in. You can push the reset button on the router very quickly. It's the same button that you push to put it into DFU mode. Just to press it and let it go right away. You'll notice that the lights on the router come on and start to blink. That indicates that the regulator is now back in regular mode. And now we see from the status that the regulator is in configuration mode. Again, we can go back to the AST tab to note that indeed we have data coming out of the regulator. We can go back to tools. We can push the status button, for example, to get the raw status from the regulator. I'm going to hit the refresh button here to get the last action refresh. Let's see. There it is. And we note here that, so this is the raw status information from the regulator. We notice that here indeed the regulator is telling us that it's running version 2.4.1a, which is the one that we had selected. So we're done with the firmware update. One final thing before we finish. We want to remove the configuration mode, because the configuration mode keeps the field to 0 and other things, keeps the regulator from regulating. And then we hit save and apply. And once we're done, we need to restart the regulator to put it in its regular charging cycle. But that completes the firmware update. So until next time, this is Lewis wishing you a great day, and we'll see you soon.